4 astronauts are stationed on a near-Earth space station when they face a critical situation. As they try to avoid a collision with space debris, the commander, Vincent, is returning from outer space. Meanwhile, Justine, the communications engineer, works to identify a malfunction preventing the station from maneuvering. The captain's assistant, Jonathan, informs the crew that there are only 6 minutes left before impact and suggests evacuation. However, Justine eventually locates the issue and Dr. Andrea requests coordinates from Mission Control. Once they receive the coordinates, Jonathan activates the engines and the station shifts, narrowly avoiding the debris. The crew celebrates the completion of their 500th day in space, noting that they have the same number of days left until the mission's end. The scene transitions to a flashback of their launch day, when the president of Quebec addressed the citizens, celebrating the start of a groundbreaking 1,000-day mission. The mission, led by Vincent Clair, Mars' second human visitor, was launched amid a global crisis, where resource shortages drove a search for water in space. Scientists focused on Europa, one of Jupiter's moons believed to harbor water beneath its ice crust. Quebec's space probe was sent to Europa, paving the way for a future manned mission. To prepare the astronauts for such an extended mission, Quebec initiated a 3-year orbital training program. The crew, who had worked and bonded together for years, had become close friends. Jonathan, the engineer, was tasked with processing signals from the probe, driven by the hope that his work could change the world. Justine managed the station's electronics, Andrea coordinated experiments and crew health, and Vincent, the captain, was responsible for preparing for the Europa mission. As the mission neared its 900th day, Jonathan, reflecting on the journey, is interrupted by a signal from the probe. Soon after, fresh water is discovered on Europa. The news spreads across Earth, heralding a major breakthrough. The president awards medals to the team while the astronauts celebrate with champagne smuggled aboard by Andrea. The crew bonds over the success, and Vincent recalls his experience on Mars, sharing that the biggest shock was returning to Earth and realizing how much had changed. Later, a signal warns of an approaching solar storm, and the astronauts are confined to their cabins for safety. However, Jonathan and Justine choose to spend their isolation together. Andrea reads letters from her partner, tears filling her eyes. As a protocol alert sounds, she meets Vincent in the corridor, only to realize the others are delayed. Justine leaves Jonathan's cabin, and Vincent reprimands him for breaking protocol, especially considering the crew had recently consumed alcohol, a violation of station rules. The tension escalates when Andrea urgently calls the crew to the kitchen, where they see news of an explosion in Montreal. Hundreds are dead and thousands injured after a bombing in the subway. The president vows to punish those responsible. While the astronauts are reassured that their families are safe, Vincent learns that his son has been severely injured. Rumors spread that the attack was linked to the astronauts' discovery. Despite the tragedy, the crew decides to continue their mission, understanding that it represents humanity's last hope. Tragedy strikes further when Vincent learns that Xavier, a backup astronaut, has died. Overcome with grief, Andrea locks herself in her cabin, remembering how Xavier had supported her throughout the training. Later, Vincent comforts his son, who is worried about his future in basketball after his injuries. Meanwhile, Jonathan teaches Justine to play the piano. Suddenly, all communication with Earth is lost, and Justine heads to the systems to investigate. As Jonathan gathers the crew to the observation window, they are horrified to see explosions tearing across the planet. Desperate, they try to contact Mission Control, but there is no response. Vincent orders messages to be sent across all frequencies, but there is no response. Justine notes that nuclear explosions have rocked major cities, including Montreal. Just as they lose hope, the German space station responds, but they too have no information and have lost communication. Vincent declares radio silence, acknowledging that they are in the middle of a war. Jonathan suggests evacuation, but Vincent questions where they could go and reminds them that their primary duty is to follow Mission Control's orders. Andrea, thinking of their families, expresses concern, but the astronauts remain powerless to assist. 6 days pass, and the astronauts watch Earth from afar, its surface dark and devoid of light. They remember their families while Vincent periodically attempts to contact Earth, but with no success. He asks Andrea to assess the crew's psychological state, but she declines, admitting that she is just as anxious as the others. Instead, she offers to listen to him. Vincent confesses his frustration, feeling resentful after being second on Mars, and now that he had the chance to be first, everything has collapsed. Worse yet, he fears losing his son, which terrifies him more than anything. He admits that he no longer knows why he wanted to become an astronaut. The crew shares this sentiment, questioning the purpose of their mission when everything they love might be lost. They search for a reason to continue. On the 1000th day, the crew is supposed to return to Earth and prepare for the Europa mission. Suddenly, an alarm sounds and the AI announces that the emergency escape capsule will launch in 2 minutes. The crew rushes to the capsule only to find Vincent inside preparing to abandon the station. Jonathan opens the door and drags Vincent out while Andrea seals the hatch. However, it's too late to stop the launch and the capsule detaches, leaving the crew stranded with no option for evacuation. Vincent, behaving irrationally, is sedated by Andrea. The remaining 3 astronauts are left in despair, uncertain of their next steps. Following protocol, Andrea declares Vincent unfit for command and appoints herself as the new leader. She reflects on Xavier's death, recalling the moment he proposed to her and her decision to join the mission. Meanwhile, Justine attempts to approach Jonathan, but he is not receptive and asks her to leave. Later, Vincent admits to having had a nervous breakdown and doesn't even remember getting into the escape capsule. He confesses that he just wanted to see his son. Jonathan accuses him of selfishness and cowardice, leading to a heated argument, which Andrea interrupts. They realize they can't return to Earth or expect rescue. Andrea calculates their remaining supplies and determines they can survive for 25 more days if they ration carefully. During this time, they must find a solution. Justine begins to panic, questioning what they would do if they did make it back to Earth, now that everything seems lost. She recalls a friend who disapproved of her decision to join the mission, but back then, she had been confident in her choice. Unable to cope with the despair, Justine exits into open space and Jonathan watches her disappear into the void, reflecting on his coldness toward her. Andrea tries to console him, but an hour later, they receive a signal from the Russian orbital station. The surviving cosmonaut requests help and prepares to dock his rescue capsule. When the cosmonaut arrives, Andrea notices his emaciated state and radiation exposure. They soon realize that they likely can't save him. Vincent points out that the Russian capsule, designed for 3 people, now has to accommodate 4 astronauts with oxygen running low. Staying on the station is no longer an option. Jonathan suggests waiting for the cosmonaut to die and then using his capsule to return to Earth. Andrea refuses, especially as the cosmonaut begins to recover. He explains that his station's reflectors failed during the solar storm, killing his crew. Jonathan calculates the possibility of returning all 4 astronauts in the capsule, but concludes it's impossible. He reflects on Justine's sacrifice and reproaches himself for his coldness toward her. The cosmonaut admits that he is terminally ill and knows he won't survive much longer. He reveals that the greatest war in human history has erupted on Earth, sparked by their discovery. Vincent is shocked. Could this really have been a war over water? The cosmonaut laughs, calling them naive, and explains that water was just a pretext. Jonathan takes a closer look at the data from Europa and notices something they had overlooked before: a massive unknown object on Europa's surface, resembling an alien spacecraft. The crew questions why this discovery was kept from them while the Russians clearly knew. On Earth, the conflict was framed as a war over water, but in truth, Quebec had hidden the existence of extraterrestrial technology. Vincent insists that humanity must know the truth. This ship could revolutionize their understanding of the universe. He is determined to find out who built it and where they came from. Later, the cosmonaut thanks Andrea for her care, knowing he has little time left. Despite Vincent's push for an immediate launch, Jonathan reflects on a farewell letter from his father, which he had avoided reading out of guilt. Andrea soon discovers that the cosmonaut has disappeared from the medical bay. She finds him near the evacuation section, where he realizes their capsule is missing. Moments later, Vincent and Jonathan hear Andrea scream. The cosmonaut has taken her hostage, demanding they open the doors so he can return to his capsule. Despite the crew's protests, Andrea reluctantly gives him the code but reminds him of those who might still be alive on Earth. Moved by her words, the cosmonaut abandons his plan. The crew discusses their remaining options. The cosmonaut suggests using the Soyuz capsule, but it's too old to land without assistance from Earth. Sensing his hesitation, Andrea reassures him that he will return home. Vincent volunteers to stay behind, blaming himself for the loss of their capsule. On the 1026th day, the crew prepares to depart. Vincent writes a letter to his son, asking Jonathan to find him if he is still alive. Jonathan promises to do so. As they say their goodbyes, Jonathan announces he will stay behind. He intends to broadcast the truth about the Europa discovery to all channels, ensuring humanity learns what they found. He asks Vincent to deliver his father's letter. Andrea promises to send help as soon as possible. The 3 astronauts suit up and leave in the capsule, while Jonathan remains alone on the station. He begins transmitting the truth, mentally bidding farewell to his father, who, as it turns out, never blamed him and was always proud of him. The film concludes not with any conclusive science fiction revelations about alien civilization, but with a focus on the psychological strain astronauts endure in extreme conditions. The exploration of this theme offers no optimistic conclusions, emphasizing the toll that such a mission takes on the human psyche.